Award-winning TV presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome to the news of the hour from Abu Dhabi TV. The Palestinian government, under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, held its first meeting with the Palestinian president following the Sharm el-Sheikh and Aqaba summits. Thousands of Palestinians demonstrate in the Gaza Strip in response to Hamas' calls to reject the Aqaba resolutions, to continue with the resistance, and not to disarm. Now to our correspondent in Gaza, Hazem Badaru.
A number of marches were launched in different areas in Gaza, organized by Hamas, the national and Islamic organizations. These demonstrations coincide with Hamas's announcement of stopping its negotiations with Abu Mazen's government, in protest of the Al-Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh resolutions. The other Palestinian factions are still reviewing the issue.
2 Hamas activists were martyred, and a third was injured by Israeli gunfire in the city of Tulkarm in the West Bank. A team from the International Atomic Energy Agency inspects the Duwaitha complex southeast of Baghdad under tight U.S. restrictions in an effort to assess the losses due to the looting of the complex. One person was killed and another was wounded following the bombing of a number of villages in the Pakistani section of the disputed Kashmir region. Pope John Paul II holds Mass in the city of Dubrovnik, Croatia. About 70,000 pilgrims attended the Mass. This is the Pope's 200th visit since he became Pope in 1978. This is the end of the news in brief. Welcome. Today, the White House reiterated that they will continue to work on ending the violence in the Middle East, despite the fact that Hamas declared that they will stop the negotiations with the Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas. A White House spokesman said that Hamas is an enemy of peace, adding that Washington will continue to work with all sides to achieve peace. Meanwhile, the Palestinian government, under Mahmoud Abbas's leadership, held its first meeting with the Palestinian president following the Sharm el-Sheikh and Aqaba summits. The meeting coincided with Hamas's announcement of stopping their negotiations with the Palestinian government, after hearing Abu Mazen's statements at the conclusion of the Aqaba summit, promising to stop the armed resistance. This afternoon, thousands of Palestinians demonstrated in various areas of the Gaza Strip in response to Hamas's calls to reject the resolutions of the Aqaba summit.
In a new development, the Islamic resistance movement Hamas denounced that they will halt their talks with Abu Mazen's government in response to the resolutions of Sharm el-Sheikh and Al-Aqaba summits, saying that statements made by Abu Mazen made major concessions which are unacceptable to the Palestinians. The issues surrounding the refugees, the right of return, Jerusalem, the Palestinian captives and detainees. Thus, Abu Mazen's government put itself in a difficult position for negotiations. He took a difficult, harsh and huge step backward. So what's the use of negotiating now? And what direction will the negotiations take? We are seriously evaluating the possibility of stopping these negotiations. However, Sheikh Yassin asserted that Abdulaziz al-Rantisi's decision to stop the talks with Abu Mazen's government reflects the position of the movement. We did not see anything in this new position by the Palestinian Authority, where they compromised all the legitimate national rights and fully agreed with Sharon and the Zionist entities' plans of oppression. All we can say now is that the authority closed the door to negotiations, and there isn't any chance for reaching a mutual agreement. Hamas' position preceded the mass demonstrations that followed the Friday's prayer in different areas in the Gaza Strip. The demonstrations were organized by Hamas and other national groups who are still reviewing the issue of negotiations. Unfortunately, Brother Abu Mazen's statements exceeded the demands from him. We are saying that these demonstrations are to assert our people's legitimate right to resist. We at the front are seriously reviewing this issue, and what I can tell you now is that we will never accept that these negotiations with Abu Mazen will lead to the end of resistance under the pretext of a peace agreement. The Palestinian captives and detainees in the Israeli occupation's prisons all demanded from the factions that they hold to talks with Abu Mazen's government. The various demonstrations in Gaza came to express the people's objection to the resolutions of Sharm el-Sheikh and Al-Aqaba. The Hamas movement announced that they will stop their negotiations with Abu Mazen's government. The other Palestinian factions are still reviewing their position. Thousands of Arab volunteers who came to Iraq to sacrifice their lives were accused of supporting Saddam Hussein's regime. Ahmed Hishami is one of those volunteers. He spoke to Abdul Qadir al-Jiradi about his trip to Iraq, which started at the beginning of last April. As soon as Ahmed Hishami realized that the war against Iraq was inevitable, he traveled with thousands of other Arab volunteers to Baghdad to fight against the British and American forces. They wanted to show that jihad is achieved by action rather than words.
I realized that the war against Iraq was inevitable from watching the United States propaganda against Iraq.
In these buildings, which belong to the first military academy, the Arab volunteers gathered to receive theoretical training on how to use weapons and fighting methods with Saddam's Fidaiyin.
They used to bring photographs to make it look like we were being trained on how to use weapons, but that never happened. 90% of the Arab volunteers in Iraq were not trained on how to use weapons.
However, despite the lack of training and the long period of waiting before fighting, orders were made for the volunteers to participate in the fighting. One of their battles took place in Al-Qadisiyah district in the north of Baghdad.
When you have untrained men face a technologically advanced military power, what do you expect? I saw with my own eyes Arab volunteers being burned.
The Arab volunteers realized that they were betrayed.
We knew that we were betrayed, but we didn't know who betrayed us.
The biggest setback that the Arab volunteers experienced was at the Republican Palace battle, where thousands of volunteers were killed. The ordinary Iraqi people turned their backs on the volunteers. They were selling the Arab volunteers to American soldiers for very cheap prices.
The Iraqis sold each Arab volunteer to the Americans for 4,000 dinars in Al-Halla. Saddam Hussein is the one who brought the volunteers here. The other volunteers came to defend Saddam's regime. I want to inform you that no Arab volunteer received any money from Saddam Hussein's regime. They came to fulfill a religious duty.
Amid mounting anti-U.S. attacks, the U.S. administration in occupied Iraq moved early Friday to crack down on growing unrest. U.S. forces conducted a house-to-house search in the Iraqi city of Fallujah in an effort to find those responsible for the killing of one American soldier and the wounding of 5. A leaflet was allegedly found at the scene of the attack calling on Iraqis to stand together to fight the Americans. One man was arrested apparently for possessing a weapon. U.S. forces have come under increasing attack in Fallujah. At least 6 U.S. soldiers have been killed in attacks in Iraq over the past 2 weeks. The latest attack came a day after more than 1,400 soldiers from the U.S. Army moved into Fallujah and surrounding areas in central Iraq.
Nights are a nightmare. From 11 till 4. We refer to it as the witching hour, and that's when they attack us using guerrilla tactics.
The war is now beginning in Fallujah. From today. What happened last night was an attack from people who hate the Americans being in Iraq.
On the political front, U.S. Governor of occupied Iraq Paul Bremer was poised for new talks Friday on Iraq's political future after scrapping a promised national political conference and sidelining the would-be leaders who had hoped to spearhead it. A wide range of new parties that have emerged in the 2 months since Saddam Hussein's overthrow were set to meet with Bremer, along with minority groups and tribal and religious leaders. The former exiles on a 7-strong leadership council that had been the US-led occupation authorities' main Iraqi interlocutor until last Sunday were also expected to attend, despite their anger over Bremer's change of plans that sparked accusations the occupation authority intends to handpick its own Iraqi advisors. The new process is aimed at trashing out the details and membership of an interim administration that would name advisors to work with the occupation authority. In his first visit to senior Shi'ite clerics in the holy city of Najaf, the head of the Kurdistan Democratic Party, Masoud al-Barzani, visited Thursday prominent cleric Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Sistani. During the meeting, both parties stressed on the necessity of electing an Iraqi government and on the unity, security and stability of the country. They also said that all disagreements among Iraqis should be discarded. Barzani also paid a visit to Ayatollah Bahr al-Ulum and the head of the Supreme Assembly for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim. Barzani and al-Hakim discussed means to coordinate positions concerning the US occupation's formation of the interim administration in the coming 6 weeks, saying that its members should be given major authorities. They said that this administration should at the same time represent the choice of Iraqis. A trade spat between Gulf War allies escalated Friday when US wheat growers called for the Australian bureaucrat charged with restoring Iraq's agricultural sector to be sacked. US wheat associates called for Trevor Flogger's removal as coordinator of the Iraqi Agriculture Department, saying he was a master monopolist who was looking out for Australia's trade interests at the expense of US farmers. US wheat growers keen to enter the lucrative Iraqi market accused their Australian rivals this week of achieving its pre-war dominance by paying kickbacks to Saddam Hussein's family. The debate over Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction widened on Friday after the top UN arms inspector Hans Blix questioned the credibility of US experts searching for them. Blix said it is not justified to jump to the conclusion that something exists just because it is unaccounted for. Meanwhile, Peter Frank, a German member of the UN inspectors team, has accused the US authorities of presenting false evidence against the regime. He told the German daily Der Spiegel that US Secretary of State Colin Powell did not present truthful evidence to the UN Security Council in a famous February 5 speech, which he called a big bluff. His criticism adds to a growing tide of accusations that the US and its key ally Britain deliberately manipulated information to make it look as if Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. The chief UN weapons inspector Hans Blix gave his final report to the UN Security Council on Thursday. Blix questioned the credibility of US-led experts searching for the alleged banned weapons in Iraq and told the UN that while his team had not found that Iraq had resumed its production of weapons of mass destruction, that did not mean such programs did exist.
The Commission has not at any time during the inspections in Iraq found evidence of the continuation or resumption of programs or weapons of mass destruction or significant quantities of proscribed items, whether from pre-1991 or later. There remain a long list of items unaccounted for. But it is not justified to jump to the conclusion that something exists just because it is unaccounted for.
Russian Ambassador Sergei Lavrov said the international community must join efforts to verify the presence of alleged weapons of mass destruction and make sure the programs are not resumed in Iraq. But US Ambassador to the UN John Negroponte indicated that the issue of establishing whether there are such weapons in Iraq would be alone the responsibility of the US-led forces.
I think that one thing I can assure you of is that there will be utmost transparency, and when there is anything that needs to be shared both with the international community and the public, I'm sure that we will do so.
Before the U.S. launched its war against Iraq, it greatly undermined the work of UN inspectors as useless and called for the abrupt halt of inspections despite the opposition of most UN Security Council members. And now the failure to find the banned weapons cited by London and Washington as the main reason for war has fueled a political storm, especially in Britain. But there is growing anger in the U.S. as well. Senator Robert Byrd, the Democrat Senate's most outspoken critique of President George W. Bush, on Wednesday accused him of constructing a house of cards to justify the war against Iraq. He also accused the Bush administration of luring the American public into war by inflating threats posed by Saddam Hussein.
It is time, past time, for this administration to level with the American people, and it is time for the President of the United States to demand an accounting from his own administration as to exactly how our nation was led down such a twisted path to war.
Several Democratic presidential candidates called on Bush to publicly reveal any evidence he has on Iraq's possession of alleged banned weapons. The U.S. president, meanwhile, continues to insist that Baghdad has had such weapons and that they will be found, but that, according to him and his administration, it needs time. Ali Abbas, the 14-year-old Iraqi boy whose tragedy shook the world, is making good progress at a special burns unit in Kuwait. Ali lost both arms and was horribly burned when American warplanes bombed his house in a small village near Nasriya, killing 16 members of his family. When Ali arrived at the Al-Batain Center in Kuwait in mid-April, after 2 weeks in Baghdad, he was in a serious condition. He had severe burns on his chest, abdomen and back, which had become badly infected, and he was severely dehydrated and anemic.
We were asleep around midnight. The American airplanes came and dropped missiles. We live in a small village of only 4 houses. All of them were destroyed. 16 members of my family were killed. I stayed for 2 weeks in Baghdad, and then I was transferred to Kuwait. I am okay now. The burns have held, and now I'm just waiting for the artificial limbs.
All the graft take excellent. The graft healed, the donor area healed, and Ali, he is for rehabilitation, I mean physiotherapy, to strengthen the amputation stem of his right upper limb to prepare him for the artificial limbs.
The Palestinian group Hamas has said it is breaking off talks with Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas on ending its attacks on Israelis. The announcement by Abdulaziz al-Rantisi, a top Hamas leader, set Palestinian radicals and Abbas's new reformist government on a collision course. He said Abbas made unacceptable commitments, including a demilitarization of the Palestinian uprising under a demand by the roadmap to peace to halt to violence. Hamas's founder and spiritual leader Sheikh Ahmed Yassin told reporters they have stopped the dialogue with the Palestinian Authority, adding this is their choice and they have no alternative. Holding their first meeting after the trilateral summit in Aqaba, Abbas and Palestinian President Yasser Arafat were to discuss Hamas's moves. Abbas held truce talks with the group before the Aqaba meeting and had expressed confidence that he would achieve a ceasefire soon. Commenting on the Hamas move, Palestinian Cabinet Minister Zaid Abu Amr signaled Abbas would do his utmost to steer clear of armed conflict with the group. The White House denounced Hamas's decision, but said President Bush's peace efforts would go on. Meanwhile, Israeli sources said Abbas and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon will meet in the coming days to discuss security issues. They said Palestinian and Israeli security officials will resume contacts at the highest level. Starting next week, in what context, they said, Israeli Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz will meet soon with Palestinian security official Mohammed Dahlan. And as the debate among Palestinians goes on, Israeli raids into the Palestinian towns continues. claiming more lives. Troops shot and killed 2 Palestinians in a village near the West Bank town of Tulkarm. An Israeli military source said the 2 were members of Hamas group and had planned a suicide attack in Israel. Elsewhere in the West Bank, 5 university students were wounded when they were caught in the middle of indiscriminate shooting by Israeli forces at Birzeit University. Further north, Israeli troops tightened their grip on Nablus, sealing off all its entrances as they raided homes in their search for suspected activists. In the Gaza Strip, Palestinian sources said 2 Palestinians were critically wounded near an Israeli settlement. Also, an Israeli military spokesman said 3 mortar shells were fired at a Jewish settlement in southern Gaza. In a move that could help boost confidence for the new Palestinian government, the Bush administration says it is considering easing restrictions on direct U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority. But a senior administration official said any change in policy would take time. He said the administration wanted to take a look and talk to Congress about when it might be appropriate to give direct support to the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian leaders have asked the White House to reverse a long-standing policy that blocks U.S. aid from going directly to the authority. President George W. Bush is back in the White House following his participation in the Middle East Peace Summit in Aqaba. The president welcomed Portuguese Prime Minister José Manuel Barroso to thank him for his loyal support in the war against Iran.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation,